Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Satan's Slaves, an Indonesian horror film from 2017. This film is set in 1981. Our main protagonist is a woman named Rini. Her family is financially broken, and she lives with her father, her mother who is ill, her grandmother who is crippled, and her three brothers in an old house in the countryside that is nearby a cemetery. Now, her mother, who was a successful singer at one point, is dying from a mysterious disease, and her father does not have money to support the family. Now, after her mother passes away under some pretty terrifying circumstances, her father travels to the city to take care of some business, but disturbing hauntings occur while he's away. So the skeptical Rini then seeks help from a religious man, and they learn about the truth. Now, one of the most important things about this movie that you need to know is that it was directed by Joko Anwar. If the name sounds familiar, it's because I've covered him multiple times in my Asian horror playlist. He directed the film Modus Anomaly, also known as Ritual, from 2012, but even more importantly, he directed The Forbidden Door from 2009, which is not only my favorite Asian horror film from that particular year, but one of my favorite horror films of the last decade from any country. Now, it's unfortunate, I guess you could say, that The Forbidden Door never got a legitimate English subtitled release, but it does occasionally pop up on YouTube, and I highly recommend it if you can find it. So when I heard that Joko was directing another horror film, I got stoked. And Satan's Slaves is a remake of the Indonesian horror film of the same name from 1982. I briefly reviewed that film in my Asian horror playlist when I covered the 1980s, but I was unfortunately not much of a fan of that one. I wasn't. I did enjoy certain aspects of it, but it had a lot of uninteresting dialogue and filler to sit through, and the scare tactics were mostly unimpressive in my opinion. Now, going into this remake, I had faith that Joko would be able to improve upon the original, and that is exactly what he did here. This film screams high quality in just about every aspect. Direction is fantastic, which is no surprise, given the director. I mean, sometimes when you watch a horror film, you can just tell that the director knows what he's doing. That's the case here. Everything looks really good, and there's a certain craftsmanship that is evident in every single scene of this film. Performances are impressive by everyone, including the children. And consequently, I like the family dynamics because it feels like a real family. You know what I mean? It's very easy to root for their well-being in this. I especially enjoy the acting by the female lead. I guess she's my favorite character in this. The story itself is pretty basic, but it's good enough. The cause for these events is actually pretty interesting, and it is not revealed until around the midpoint of the film, so I won't spoil it for you. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. The scares. What are the scare tactics in this? Overall, they were very effective, I think. There's a premonition scene early on that kind of freaked me out. There's a scene involving a bed sheet that freaked me out as well, during the first half hour or so. However, I will admit that I was a little bit worried early on because there are a few jump scares in this, which I'm not a fan of. Generally not a fan of jump scares, in general, in terms of the methods of scaring people, right? Fortunately, the early portions of Satan's Slaves reminded me of good quality Thai horror films. You know what I mean? Because the good quality Thai horror films use jump scares, usually a few too many, but they use them more selectively and in such a way that is acceptable and interesting to watch. They usually set up the scares properly, and there's also a lingering effect after the scare is executed. That's how if I'm going to have a jump scare, I prefer that. It can't just be a friend slapping a person on the back of the shoulder with a loud boom noise trying to scare me in a horror film, right? That type of thing really is obnoxious. So the scares in this one, even the jump scares, are mostly acceptable for me. And that's not that common. But I still was a little bit worried during the first half of this film that the scare tactics would be too one-dimensional. Thankfully, though, most of the really cool stuff is saved for the second half, and they do not revolve around jump scares. There's one scene that begins in a bedroom. A little kid's kind of half asleep, and he makes like a creepy sign language gesture, and it goes from there. And it actually finishes in the morning. It has like a montage, and it finishes in the morning. And there's a shot of a character, and you're not sure if they made it through the night or not. And that's a really good scene, one of my favorites in the film. There are also a few bloody moments as well to mix things up. So this film is more dynamic in its horror sequences than you might expect after watching the first half hour. And there is actually a lot of horror content in this film. There are a lot of scares in this, and they are sufficiently intense, so that's good. Looking at it, Satan's Slaves has a conventional setup and a basic structure, but it's the execution that really counts here. This is yet another sufficiently unnerving Asian horror film from the past few years. We've had Gongjiam in The Wailing from South Korea, The Sleep Curse from Hong Kong, which was a throwback to those nasty Category 3 films from the early 90s. Hanadama Phantom, which was a pretty... Man, that movie had a finale that's just wrong, from Japan. And Take Me Home from Thailand had some really cool and unnerving sequences. And now Satan's Slaves from Indonesia. And all those films just have come out in the past 2 or 3 years alone. So, I'm still way behind on Asian horror films from 2016, 2017, 2018, right? It takes a while for these things to get released and be more available to watch. But it's a pretty exciting time to be a fan of Asian horror films, as it usually is. Now, I was skimming some online reviews of Satan's Slaves, and it would seem that I'm a bit late to this party for this movie. On IMDb alone, there are 39 user reviews and 51 critic reviews. So a lot of people have seen this one, surprisingly. It's not a lot of people, I think, are looking forward to it, like on the message boards that I frequent or just the internet in general. But there's some noise about this one out there. It's nice to see. The critical reviews that I read were very positive, meaning that this is one of those films that you absolutely need to watch if you want to keep up to date with contemporary Asian horror. I strongly recommend Satan's Slaves, and it is available on Region 3 DVD with English subtitles. And as always, I'll see you next time.